In 1911, Oklahoma City was young and growing quickly. Since its founding 22 years earlier, it had already grown to 65,000 people, with more coming in each day. As I was browsing through eBay recently, I came across a letter from that year, postmarked Oklahoma City. When it arrived, the heartfelt message of love contained inside made me want to find out who its author and recipient were. Here's what it said.
Friday night, my dear sweetheart. Would you be glad tonight, sweetheart, if I was with you and could tell you how happy I am because of your love? You would be glad, dear, if you only knew how I love you and how I long to be with you. I would not love you truly if I only loved when the sun is shining. 'Tis through the shadows and darkest hours we need each other the most. It would be happiness if I could give you one ray of sunshine, if I could be there to cheer you and try to make you forget the things that bother you most. Yes, sweetheart, I should be your wife, your comforter in time of trouble, your help in time of need. That is what my idea of true and genuine happiness is. 'Tis true love that makes me want to be with you. 'Tis love that makes me care for nothing but thoughts of you. I am true to you, dear. I believe if you could know my every thought, my every act since the night you left me, you would know that no wife could possibly be truer to a husband. I care for naught but for you and your love. I wish you were here tonight. I want to talk to you. I want to sit on your lap with my arms around you and tell you all in my heart. Sweetheart, you know I cannot stay away from you another year. The teachers are to sign a contract for another position, another year, in order to be paid through the summer months. That is to be done the last of this month. Tell me, sweetheart, what you think. What shall I do? I can ask none other. It seems I cannot stay away another long, long year. But you know best, and it shall be as you say. Tell me, dear, tell me, sweetheart, honestly, what do you think? A kiss and good night, love. My love and my heart. Best wishes, Josie.
Finding the writer of this letter is not going to be easy, especially since she left no return address and only signed her first name Josie. But at least we have more to go on for who the letter was written to. A Mr. N.G. Watts at the Gramercy in Washington, D.C. My first stop will be Ancestry.com, where I will do a search for that name in Washington, D.C. I'll begin by looking for an exact match to see if I can get lucky. If not, I can go back and loosen up the parameters and search again. Okay, so there are two listings for that exact name, both from the U.S. Register of Civil and Naval Service. One is from 1899 and the other from 1901. Both are from over 10 years before the letter was written, though. But it's a start. This is a list of employees for the Government Printing Office, and it has some information about N.G. Watts. It says he was born in Texas, which is much closer to Oklahoma than Washington, and that he was appointed to this position in St. Louis. Okay, so back to Ancestry, where I will search again for an N.G. Watts that lived in St. Louis and that was born in Texas. And I'll mark that exact and search. And looks like we have a Nathaniel G. Watts born in Texas in the 1910 and 1920 census. Let's look at 1910, since that was only a year before the letter was written. And he's a printer for the government. It's the same guy that was in Washington. It's our guy. Let's see what else we can find out about him. It shows that he was single in 1910 and living with an uncle. Let's see what Find a Grave says about him. It shows he was born in 1869 and died in 1962 back in Texas at the age of 93. Doesn't show any spouse or children. Let's go back to Ancestry and look at his death certificate. And it shows us that he was retired from the Government Printing Office, a printer, and it says never married, Nathaniel Gillum Watts. Wow, very interesting. So, let's find out who he was. Doing a few hours of research, I was able to find out quite a bit about Nathaniel Watts, or Nat Watts as he was called. He was born on May 14, 1869 in Morris County, Texas, and was raised in the town of Belden, now called Naples. His father, Barry Watts, was one of the founding fathers of the town, serving as both its first mayor and postmaster. And in 1884, he began publication of the Naples Monitor newspaper. Nat's first job was working for the Cotton Belt Railroad at the age of 15. He then went to work at a livery stable. An ambitious young man, he began his own paper called the Omaha Siftings in 1890 at the age of just 21 years old. 2 years later, he left Naples for, as he put it, nowhere in particular, and ended up in Boyce, Louisiana, where he again continued in the family business by buying a printing press and founding the Boyce Enterprise newspaper, then the smallest publication in the state. He remained in Boyce for 4 years and was elected mayor twice there. In January of 1897, he left Louisiana and went to St. Louis, Missouri, where he found work as a carpenter and selling real estate. But eventually he was drawn back into his true calling, the printing business. In 1897 in St. Louis, he took a civil service exam for a job as a printer and received an appointment in Washington, D.C. working for the government printing office. That's where he would spend the next 36 years. In 1933, at the age of 64, Watts retired from the government printing office and returned to Naples, Texas, the place he always called home. 10 years later, at the age of 74, Watts was elected mayor of Naples, 50 years after serving as mayor of Boyce, Louisiana. During his long retirement, he also served as publisher of the family newspaper, the Naples Monitor, was for many years the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and worked for at least a dozen other civic organizations. When Nat Watts died on December 27, 1962, he was a beloved figure in East Texas and was eulogized by then Vice President Lyndon Johnson, who called him one of the most progressive small-town civic leaders in this country. But he died without ever marrying. In an interview given near the end of his life, he was asked about his lifelong bachelorhood. He responded, "I don't mind folks knowing I'm single. I just never got very far along that road." Which brings us back to Josie. So who was Josie? The letter itself doesn't offer many clues. We know that her name was Josie, she was single, she was a teacher, and that she lived in Oklahoma City in 1911. Now there was a census in 1910, and since Josie was most likely in Oklahoma City for at least part of that year, I'm going to do a search to see how many single teachers named Josie there were in the city. So it's back to Ancestry.com, where I'm going to search the 1910 U.S. Census. I'm going to search for a Josie who lived in Oklahoma City and who was a teacher. Mark that exact and search. And nothing. I began to wonder, was Josie a nickname? What is Josie short for? Josette? Josephine? A quick Google search gave me my answer. Josie is short for Josephine. So let's change the name to Josephine and leave everything else the same. And search. We have some hits. We have 3 teachers named Josephine in Oklahoma City. Let's go in order. The first one is a Josephine Pope. This Josephine was 30 years old in 1910 and born in Texas, which is interesting because so was Nat Watts. Let's follow the link to her findagrave.com listing, which usually has more biographical information. And the first thing that pops out to me is that she was born in Morris County, Texas. That's the same county Nat Watts was from. She was born in 1876, making her only about 7 years younger than Nat, and she died with her maiden name and without any husband or children listed. Surely this is the same Josie. I get confirmation beyond any reasonable doubt when I look at the 1880 census listing for Nat Watts and Josephine Pope. Both lived in Precinct 4, Morris County, Texas. The odds of that are just too high to be a coincidence. The Josie who wrote the letter was in fact Josephine Pope. By looking at an Oklahoma City directory from 1911, I was able to find where Josephine Pope lived then. It was at 614 West 7th Street, which is now Northwest 7th. The house was torn down in 1991, but by doing some sleuthing, I tracked down a descendant of a former owner of the house, and she had a photo of it. This is where Josie lived. And here is the same spot today, a century later. It was here Josie penned her letter to Nat. To find answers, I packed my bags and headed south, across the Red River to Texas, where I located a family member of Josie's on Ancestry.com. She agreed to tell me about Josie and share her memories with me.
My name is Virginia Milner Ross, and I was born and raised in Oklahoma City. Lived in Dallas for 60 years. Josephine Pope was my great aunt. She was a younger sister of my grandmother, Olivia Pope Milner. She was a lovely lady, a prissy lady. She was always dressed to go out, wherever. She was a school teacher for at least 43 years. Well, the story was that she had a sweetheart named Nat Watts. Other cousins have told me that he came to visit frequently. She went to Naples every summer, probably up through maybe 57. Nat was very generous with Josie. Nat gave her an automobile that we have pictures of. He also gave her a pink sapphire ring that got lost along the way. Yes, I think I have a picture of she and Nat together. It was obviously taken a very long time ago. She's wearing a long dress and a hat. Dress of the time.
Virginia's stories and pictures gave Josie a face and a sense of her spirit, but she could not answer the question of why Josie and Nat never married. To try to answer that question, I'm going to go to where the story first began, to the town of Naples in East Texas.
Take me where crickets play like a symphony.
Naples, Texas, a place that was all but founded by Nat Watts' father Barry, the town's first mayor and postmaster. The town has a long history. Our first stop is the Naples Monitor, the newspaper founded by Barry Watts and is still going 134 years later. Its current owner began working there in 1956 and purchased it in 1970.
Morris Craig, publisher of the Naples Monitor.
And you knew Nat Watts?
Yes. He was big in Naples. He was the mayor of Naples for years and never was married. He was a old bachelor, and I don't know what he did with his money, but he didn't spend it on a wife or anything. But he was real big, and with the ladies, he was in the Naples Garden Club, and he grew flowers, and he would send flowers to funerals, to weddings, to bridal showers, things like that, and he loved to grow flowers.
Morris Craig shared lots of stories. He also led me to the house where Nat Watts lived. It was in this house that Nat Watts lived after his return from Washington, D.C., and it was here that he died in 1962. We had one more stop to make. Morris took us to the cemetery where Nat was laid to rest beside his father and brothers.
Virginia Albright Fleming, and I'm 91. And I live in Naples, Texas.
And you knew Uncle Nat?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about him.
I belong to the Naples Businesswomen Association, and he was a charter member also. He was the only man in our organization, but he was the mayor, and he was a businessman, and we appreciated his background. Even though he was born and reared here, he had done a lot of really interesting things. The one that I was most impressed with was his service in Washington. And he was a very interesting man. When he sat by you or with you, he told you quite a few interesting things. Now, of course, I was quite a lot younger than he at that time.
What did you call him?
Uncle Nat. I think that was what everybody called him. I called him that to his face, so I assumed that was the accepted name.
I asked Mrs. Fleming if she knew why Nat Watts never married.
No, I don't think we ever discussed that. I just knew he was a perpetual bachelor. I kind of wondered why some of the ladies in town hadn't called him, but you know, I thought that was a personal thing.
Would it be unusual for someone back then not to have ever married of his stature?
I don't remember offhand there being very many single men. I think there were quite a few single women. But I believe he was the only one I really am aware of. I might do some thinking and think of someone, but most of the men I know were married or had been married or were widowed, you know.
The answer to my question of why Nat never married Josie may lie within the letter itself.
One thing you were asking about him, some of the things I remembered personally about him, he apparently never threw away a piece of mail. There was just packages and packages and packages wrapped up of even circulars, things like he never threw anything away. Some of the letters that he wrote back and forth to the ladies when he was in Washington, and a lot of his letters have surfaced here lately, and I think this is part of what your story is all about. He'll be well known after this anyway.
When I left Naples, I received a message from someone who didn't wish to be interviewed, but had in their possession dozens more love letters from Josie to Nat. She sent them to me, and as I read them, the story started to become more clear. The letters spanned from 1908 to 1916. This was no fleeting romance. They wrote letters to each other twice a week for at least 10 years. They seemed to be engaged.
I can't understand why we are situated like this when we have both loved so long and are both old enough to appreciate each other. Sweetheart, I want you with me. I love you so. 'Tis so hard to be separated from the one we love, isn't it, sweetheart? It has seemed so long for us, but still I can't be reconciled to it and cannot think it is just right. Oh, sweetheart, can't you say when? Can't you? At the beginning of this new year, tell me that I can make my plans to go with you. I try to content myself by thinking that our happiness will be realized sometime when I am your little wife, dear. I believe you had lost hopes of us ever being together. I believe you wanted to tell me you thought it would be best for us not to hope, but did not because you knew how it would hurt me.
Throughout the letters, a common theme emerged. Josie desperately wanting to be together and being put off, and her replies often contained puzzled responses to him telling her that he did not believe she would be happy with him. I located another relative of Josie's. This one, though, is a retired forensic document examiner and profiler who worked for the San Francisco Police Department and FBI. Her resume includes work on the Zodiac murders. This time, though, the case is her great-aunt Josie. I shared all the letters with her, and she spoke to me from Oregon via Skype.
She was my great aunt. She was my maternal grandmother's older sister. Her story, what my grandmother said and my mother backed up, was that she didn't want to give up her independence. She had her own income, which most women in those days didn't. They either depended on their husbands or their brothers if they hadn't married. But a school teacher earned money of her own. And she was a very strong-minded woman. And that was the story they gave. But I wonder now, having learned some more about Nat Watts that I didn't know, if that wasn't a cover story she made up to cover for both of them.
And what do you think was the real story?
Well, I think that she much wanted to marry him. I know from reading her letters that I'd never seen before, that she did want to marry him very much, and that he was reluctant and in fact wouldn't marry her, even though he clearly loved her. But he wouldn't marry her. So he must have had some reason for that. And it occurs to me, perhaps, he was perhaps had a different sexual orientation and knew that he could never be the husband that Jo wanted, even though he loved her in his way. I lived in San Francisco for 33 years as a single straight female. And I had a lot of gay friends, both male and female. And I got a lot of insight into them, especially in the early days, in the early 70s. That was still kind of hard for people to come out in those days. And a lot of them struggled with it. They would be ostracized by their families. And many of them came from other parts of the country because they knew in San Francisco they would find acceptance. So I talked to a lot of them about the difficulties they had. And it gave me a lot of insight into people who in earlier ages and times couldn't come out or didn't dare. And the way he lived his life, he was obviously a warm and very generous and kind man. People who lived in the town with him loved him, and he was very popular. But he never had any interactions of a romantic nature with women, although he liked women. He joined the garden club and was the only male in there. He joined the Women's Businesswomen's Association and was the only male in that. So he was comfortable with women. He just didn't want to marry one. And I think early on, Jo was an innocent woman. People didn't think about that in those days. And perhaps later in life, she either figured it out or perhaps he told her finally. But it was a scandalous thing in those days. Even today, people are sometimes reluctant to admit their sexuality. And it's a shameful thing that they have to feel that way. But I think in those times, it must have been something that people didn't talk about. And it made for a very sorrowful tragedy for them that he couldn't marry her, or he wouldn't because he knew it would be a disappointment and that they would both be miserable. And I admire him for sticking to his guns, because I think it would have been very easy for him to go ahead and do that, and he would have had a brilliant cover, a beard it's called, and she was a lovely woman. He loved her. I'm sure he would have enjoyed her company, but she would have been miserable, and I think he knew that, and he had the strength to resist that.
We will probably never know for sure why Josie and Nat never married, whether it was Nat's inability to commit or something much deeper. But Josie and Nat's connection seemed to endure their entire lives, for Nat had carved a permanent place for himself in her heart, but in the way a seashell constantly grinding against a rock might do. The making of the place had been the cause of her pain, but eventually the shell was safely in the rock. It was lodged and could grind no more.
I think she was very happy later in life. I think in the early years when she was in love with Nat and wanted to marry him and he wouldn't, that was probably a sad, hard time for her. But she eventually came to terms with it, and she led a very rich, full life. And a lot of women might have been broken by this early life problem, but she wasn't. She was strong, and she made, if not the life she'd anticipated, she made a good one.
I had one more stop to make. A story I heard when I was in Naples gave me an idea.
I do remember that Uncle Nat had this city lot, maybe 2 lots, of red gladiolas. And it being July or June, red was really great. So for this shower, Nancy or Mildred must have asked him, said, "We're having a shower. Would you let us have some gladiolas?" He said, "Oh yes, just go help yourself." That was music to our ears.
Indeed, Nat's gladiolas were prized and very well known. The gladiolus symbolizes honor and remembrance, but it can also symbolize faithfulness, infatuation, and never giving up. I needed to pay a visit to Josie, to give her one final gift from Nat, the man she loved.